Hey everyone, this is Jason Venable, aka To Nerd, following up with a deep dive video on my submission for the Cloud Spokes challenge, making a button magically disappear with jQuery. So, how did we go about doing this? A couple things you might think you could do. Okay, well, somehow we're going to need to hide this button with some kind of JavaScript. So, where are we going to put that JavaScript? You might think you can put it inside of a Visualforce page and then embed it on the page layout. That actually is not going to work because Visualforce pages, when they're embedded, are served from a different domain name. And so therefore they can't do cross-communication with this page they're in at salesforce.com, being that they are hosted from the force.com domain name. Now there are some rumors out there that there are still some orgs with Visualforce hosted from the same domain, but I cannot confirm or deny those exist. So if we can't put it in a Visualforce page, where are we going to put it? The actually only place that I could think of was to put it in a sidebar component on the home page layout. So those will show up on every page, and you can create a little HTML widget here in the sidebar and actually embed JavaScript within it. So I have one already created. It's kind of an empty template right now called Dynamic Buttons. It's an HTML area button for the sidebar. You'll see one here called Dynamic Button Ajax. That's a little nugget of goodness that we'll be saving for later. So go ahead and open up this HTML area custom component for the home page, and we'll edit it. And you'll see that there's currently nothing in it. And so the key here when you edit these to embed JavaScript in them is to click the Show HTML button. And then you can basically just embed JavaScript directly into this component. So I actually have that set up already over here. I'm just going to go ahead and walk through this real quick, kind of show you exactly how it works. So the first thing we're going to do is actually embed or import the jQuery library. We're going to use the Google CDN for this example. And then basically we're going to embed a script here for showing and hiding the buttons. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that jQuery doesn't conflict with any other buttons, or any other libraries, and so that's what this line here does. And then what we actually want to do is determine what type of object the page currently is displaying. So one thing that I've added since the first video was a new field on the dynamic button object called object prefix. And so this starts to come into play when you start to have lots of records here in the dynamic button. You don't want to query dynamic button records for an opportunity if you're on the account layout. And so the only way I could really figure out how to confidently confirm what page you're on is using the object prefix from the URL 001. Some other ideas I had were, looking at the label up here, account, or some other account name on the page. The problem with this is if someone's got the translation workbench or a different language enabled, it's actually not going to say account. It might say accountee if it's Spanish. Okay, that was bad, but you get the idea. So it wouldn't actually be in English, so that wouldn't work. The only reliable way was to look at the URL and get the first 3 digits from the ID. Then we know this is an account layout that we're looking at. And then we can query only the logic from the dynamic buttons object that have the prefix 001, which is the prefix for account. So that is what this button, or this line right here does, object prefix. It gets it from the URL, kind of does some substring action to get the 3-letter digit combo. Then we basically want to query the records from the dynamic button object in salesforce.com. And you can see I'm doing this before the actual jQuery.ready event because I want that query to execute as soon as possible. I don't need the DOM layout or the page to be loaded. I can query as soon as this script runs. So that's why it's outside of the .ready block where you typically would have a lot of your logic in your code. So what we can see here is we query the button name, field ID, field value from the custom object where the object prefix equals the object prefix we got from the URL. So next, once the actual page is ready, meaning all the DOM elements have been constructed on the page, we execute this logic within this block right here. So because our logic in the dynamic buttons contains only the logic to show a button, we first have to hide all of the buttons that match that criteria. So using jQuery, we basically just loop through any of any and all of the input elements that have a name of the button name to lowercase, and then we hide it. So if we jump back into salesforce.com, you'll see on this dynamic button we have the button name Ninja Attack, which is the API name. Go back in here using a tool like Firebug. We can inspect this custom button here and see that the name for it is Ninja_Attack. So it's lowercase because HTML stuff is just lowercase a lot of the time. But this is the API name. And this actually doesn't change when languages changes, so this can always be queried. So we get that, and we basically hide it for all of the records that were defined in the custom object. The next step is to show the button if current fields on the record meet the correct criteria. So what we have to do is loop through all the records, get the field value from the page. If it matches what's in the dynamic button's custom object, show the button. Otherwise, it's already been hidden. I'm not going to show it. So we got to get the record value. So in this case, we have field ID and get the text from that. And so this ILI inner is just something Salesforce adds to all the page layouts, and we'll take a look at that in a sec. So if we go back here, we can see that the field ID is this 00NE whatever D4HC. And then we know that when we look at this field Ninja Skills, we can see the ID is basically that field ID plus that stock naming convention that Salesforce throws on the end. And we get the inner text from that, which is basically low. So we get the value. And so now that once we have the value of this field, we can show it. We only show it if it matches the value in the custom object. So we get the custom object value as well, field value. So if record value equals the value that's supposed to show it, we then actually flip those buttons back to show. So that's kind of a lot to take in. Look through the code, get comfortable with it, and I think it'll make a lot more sense. And so I hope I didn't butcher that walkthrough too much, but let's just go ahead and get this in the custom homepage component and start to see it working. So I'll copy this. I'll go here, make sure the show HTML box is checked, paste it in here, and then hit save. And then we'll also want to make sure that it's added to the layout as well, because that's just the component. So the layout, we'll edit this, make sure the dynamic buttons homepage component is there, hit next, the order is fine, and then we'll save. So if I reload this page, you will see that I refresh, and the dynamic buttons is over here, and you can see now that Ninja Skills is low, but the box is still showing, which is incorrect because over here it should only show if it's high. So what's happening here? Well, if we open up Firebug, we can see that something happened. S-force is not defined, so that was our bug. Jumping back into the code, you can see that we're using the Ajax toolkit from Salesforce to query that custom object from JavaScript. And so, okay, easy fix. All we need to do is actually import the Ajax toolkit, and then we'll be good to go. So we'll paste it in here, copy everything, go back to our home page button, or our component. Let's get rid of this. Edit, show everything, paste it in there, hit save, and let's try it again. It'll probably work this time. So it still shows. It says low, but it's still showing. It should only show when it says high. So let's pull Firebug open again, refresh the page. Now we see that when it's performing the query, it's getting some kind of error. Something with session ID. Session ID is not found, or something's weird. So importing the Ajax toolkit directly into the sidebar actually doesn't work. That makes me think that Salesforce.com is doing something even more fancy behind the scenes. Doing this alone doesn't quite cut it. And so you might think, oh, you can just embed the session ID using like a merge field or something. Problem is, in homepage components, you can't actually do any merge field functionality. It just doesn't work. So what do we need to do to get this to work? The trick is to actually use another homepage component. So that's the one I touched on earlier that I said we were going to save for later. It's actually another homepage component called links, and we're just calling it dynamic button Ajax. We'll click on this, nothing much, but the most important thing here is actually a different custom link that we're creating called dynamic button Ajax import. We'll open this up. We'll just hit edit. And you can see this is a on-click execute JavaScript button. And then here on this page, we can use the merge field syntax that Salesforce has. So require script and then basically import the Ajax toolkit like this. So let's save it. And then let's go ahead and add it to the home page layout. Edit. Dynamic buttons in Ajax. Next. So one thing that's important here, the dynamic button Ajax component actually needs to be above the dynamic buttons. If it's not, it actually loads after our script tries to run and it still breaks. So enough messing around there trying to show you guys that it doesn't quite work. So I won't do that one, but you just have to make sure that the Ajax is above the dynamic buttons. So we'll save it. Go back to this count, refresh. And you will see that now that it's low, the button actually disappeared. So it's working great so far. So we'll change this back to high, save, and there we go. We see when we open up Firebug, make a change, there's no type of error occurring, but you can see that making the post, which is basically that Ajax query, is taking about 100 milliseconds. So it's working now, there's no errors. And so the trick there is you actually have to create two components. The one that has all your script in it, dynamic buttons, and another component called dynamic buttons Ajax, which has a link, which is an on-click script event, which imports the Ajax toolkit. So it's kind of a lot of moving pieces, but so far so good. But there's still one more thing we need to do to make this even better. So the last thing we want to do is actually hide these sidebar components because they don't add to the end user experience, they get in the way, and they're just kind of there for hiding the button. So to do that, there's a couple things we need to do to our custom HTML sidebar component. The first thing we gotta do is just remove the attempt at importing the Ajax toolkit because that doesn't work. And then we actually need to get an ID that we can query with jQuery on the page. So we'll add it up here. And the key here is having a fairly unique ID for this component. So I call it sidebar component locator. And basically if you see this, something broke because we're gonna hide it. So let me save this. Oops, not even saved there. Copy, go back into Salesforce. Let's update our home page component. Reload our account page. And you'll see over here in the sidebar it now has that div. And if we look at it with Firebug, you can see that here is the div sidebar component locator. But what we actually need to hide is this element up here, this div that says sidebar module. We also need to hide the one right above it, the links module. So both of these need to be hidden. So we'll find this one and we'll hide the one above it as well. So how do we do that? Let's jump back into our custom script here. We'll copy this jQuery line of code, paste it. And so what this says is, okay, find the div element with the ID sidebar component locator, and then find the closest sidebar module, which basically traverses up the hierarchy, hide it, and then also find the previous element and hide that as well. So what it does is from the sidebar component locator, it starts traversing up the hierarchy until it finds the sidebar module. It will hide this one, and then it will hide the previous. So it will hide them both. So let's go ahead and save this and see what happens. Let's go get it. Copy. Make sure you check the Show HTML button. Save it. Go back to this page, reload. And you can see that the sidebar components are actually gone. Or they're not gone, they're just not displayed on the page. And we'll change this back to high, the ninja skills, hit save. And you can see that the ninja attack button has shown back up. And so if we actually inspect this page, the elements are still there, but you can see the style has been set to none. So that's what the sidebar component script that we just added did. So that's the deep dive. I hope it was good. It was really fast, trying to squeeze as much in as I could in the shortest amount of time possible. If you have any questions, let me know. I'm on Twitter @tnerd, or just leave a comment on this video as well. Okay, thank you.